football.
Attacking football.
Attacking football.
Hello, welcome to the Attacking Football live stream. We've got a special one for you today. It is going to be fun. Joining me as ever is Dylan. Dylan, welcome back, mate. How you doing?
I'm absolutely amazing. How are you?
Living the dream, my man. Listen, I've been trying to get these guys on the same podcast for about 6 months now. So without any further ado, our special guests, we've got James from the Muppetiers and we have the quintessential lawyer, Ollie was right. How you doing, boys? Dylan, welcome back, mate.
Well,
How you doing?
very good.
I'm absolutely amazing. How are you?
Living the dream. I mean, it's been a long time coming, this, so thank you very much for joining us on the live. Really appreciate it. So look, we're going to dive right in, and I want to start with Ollie. So yesterday, TalkSport did a bit of a naughty, didn't they? They published what they said was, it's been a long time coming now. So thank you very much. The Premier League giving us more leeway than any other clubs with a £40 million COVID write-off. You've been doing some digging. Can you give us an insight as to what you found?
So there's quite a bit that I can go into. So let's start with the 1,000-foot view, and then we can get more specific if we feel like it.
Do it.
All right. So from the 1,000-foot view, they did say one thing which was correct. I'll give them that much credit, which is more than I typically give TalkSport. And that's that Manchester United did take the largest COVID allowance. Okay. And under the Premier League rules, basically what it says is that if you have losses or exceptional costs, which can be directly attributed to COVID-19, then you can take those as essentially a get back, where those expenses or losses won't be calculated against you. And so then you get into the definitional question of what are losses and exceptional expenses. So exceptional expenses, pretty easy. It's any expenses that wouldn't ordinarily be incurred. Basically, by the nature of the expense itself, it is unique and therefore shouldn't count against you. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the second one, and so for example, on that one, like rebates to broadcasters is the biggest exceptional expense that arose out of COVID. And then the second one is writing off lost revenue. Okay. And so this can be from anything from match day capacity to, in the case of United, our four biggest causes, and this is according to Karen McGuire, are cancellation of the 2021 tour, which I believe would have been in the US, bad debts from commercial partner insolvency. So basically our sponsors went bankrupt thanks to COVID. The club being unable to fulfill sponsorship obligations during 2021 and broadcast rebates. The broadcast rebates are an exceptional expense, not a loss. And so these are our four biggest costs. They're all absolutely allowable. Also, just for the record, Manchester United took between 20 and 25% of all losses amongst all Premier League clubs. So be frank, yes. So to be frank, if you're surprised that United had the biggest write-off, then you're just not looking at how much we lost relative to everyone else.
So how come none of the other Premier League clubs are reporting losses?
Yep. So one, they are reporting losses. They're just not reporting as much as us.
Right.
Okay. So that's one of the big things. The second aspect of this is that Manchester United specifically, if you, for example, you have a sponsorship deal that goes tits up, right? Well, that will be unique to only one club who is dealing with only that sponsor, right? And so if none of, for example, Liverpool's sponsors go tits up and ours do, we get the allowance and they don't.
That makes sense.
Yep, this isn't universal. The broadcast revenue is largely universal, and that's why you see pretty much this kind of ubiquitous £1 to £4 million pound loss accounted for by virtually every club, and that's the exceptional expense of the broadcast rebates. However, when it comes to fulfilling sponsorship obligations, when it comes to commercial partner insolvency, and when it comes to canceling a tour, those are all very unique to United.
Okay, that makes sense. James, is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there were, there's obviously other things that United did that make for certain allowances, in terms of not letting go of staff, not cutting pay, things like that. That all kind of come into the argument. Obviously, this is a very unique situation, right? And I think that most clubs were able to have individualized discussions with essentially whatever the body is that governs and assesses this, to look at it, because it is entirely unique, the whole COVID thing.
Yeah.
And so in essence, for the most part, it's a lot of overreaction, because every club had those discussions and every club knew the rules and every club knew what they could count, what they couldn't count, what they were dealing with. And United got those allowances because they were allowable. Because, as with taxes, when people whine about some people not paying taxes, the whole change the rules or don't whine about it, because the people are always going to minimize their tax burden, no matter what they do. And that they have every right to do that as long as they're playing within the rules. And United do. And United did suffer the greatest losses during COVID. They have the biggest ticket revenue in the country, right? So they suffered the most from there. They have a huge broadcast revenue. They have the biggest staff, or they had until very recently the biggest staff in the country, and they did not let go of those people during COVID, when you had Arsenal firing their mascot and to save a few dollars. So it's definitely, there's a lot of reasons that United were able to do that and take that. And there's no favoritism in it. If you don't make enough as much money, if you didn't suffer these losses, if you didn't have these things lined up, then you wouldn't get those allowances. It doesn't really change the overall perspective on it. And yeah, so a lot of individual discussions with the people involved to get to this point. And the same this year in terms of meeting the PSR by July 1st, where, a lot of the math, looking at it, people wondering what's in there. They know what they're doing. And it was tight. Everything has been tight on the PSR perspective for United due to a lot of those losses. Without them, what are they going to do? Dock United 12 points because they didn't sack their staff during COVID. That's probably not what's going to happen. And that's not the reason for the losses at clubs like Everton, things like that as well, where they have different debts and ownership issues that have come into play quite differently to how it showed up with United. So yeah, the club are good with it. All these discussions were had with everybody to arrive at this point, and there really shouldn't be any clubs having question about who and why they're getting these allowances.
So the general consensus that we have here is that TalkSport are just being massively disingenuous.
Also,
yeah.
James mentioned Everton specifically, and I kind of want to go in on that one because this has been one of the really pissed me off. I'm not gonna lie. So one of the arguments surrounding all of this is that Everton were not allowed to take any allowances with regard to their loss of sponsorship arising out of Finch Farms. Okay. And this arose as a sanction for Uzmov, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
Basically during when Russia, decided to pull Russia and invade Ukraine, then he was sanctioned because, he's an oligarch. And people are comparing that to the United situation because that loss of sponsorship was not an allowance that was afforded to Everton. So just to clarify here, we are comparing a Russian oligarch getting sanctioned because he was helping Putin declare war on an innocent country.
I mean, it's not a laughing matter really, but...
No, it's not, but the presentation is almost funny. The fact that they're even being put side by side is laughable. And so you have that compared to Manchester United having sponsorships that go wrong due to COVID.
They're not comparable, are they? Let's face it. I mean, there's also an element that I'm acutely aware that Manchester United are publicly listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Therefore, their books are there in granular detail for everyone else to see. And it's just not the same level of detail for the other clubs when they do their reporting, right?
Yep. So we have a lot more transparency with regard to United than most other clubs do. If a club is, closely held, all you're going to get is that which is disclosed to the Premier League. For example, Deloitte has a contract with the Premier League that publishes a lot of revenue figures, breakdowns of revenues, things like that. Likewise, you have the disclosures that are made public pursuant to Premier League rules. However, United, we've got the New York Stock Exchange. And speaking as somebody who practices securities law, if the SEC says to disclose it, you fucking disclose
it. Okay. Look, there's a few people in the chat that are asking if we're live and if they can ask questions. Yes, we are live. You can ask questions. These boys will answer them. But what I do want to go on to is probably the biggest transfer rumor that seems to be rearing its ugly head again. James, Frenkie de Jong is back and it's driving me mental. What can you tell us?
What you Frenkie de Jong is always been like a very challenging topic for United, of course, because if you mention anything about him, people are going to run it to the moon, right? In terms of how far, how likely that they want it, that they don't want it, all of that. Barcelona have been trying to dump Frenkie de Jong for a long time. And, now you have a situation where he's been injured for a long time. He still is on these massive wages, 600,000 a week. Like, this is not a joke, the amount of wages he's on. And yet United still, of course, like him. And so it kind of centers around that, where you can have any credibility, where you can have sort of almost a plausible rumor in it, that United will always keep an eye on a player like Frenkie de Jong to say, if he's available, if he's good, if we could get him, sure, we'd be involved in that. But that doesn't mean anything is happening at this point in time. And obviously, when United are looking for midfielders, will they have potentially made a check-in and said, okay, what's the situation with Frenkie de Jong? Probably. They probably would have. Anybody would have who is looking at these things. And they probably have pretty recently, just in assessing all of their choices and all of the options that are out there. But that's about it. That's about it, is all it really says at the moment, is that's where it is. Moving on from, obviously, look, they had been focused on Ugarte, and obviously we'll talk about all the different midfield options. With that kind of moving on at the moment, they're going to be checking on virtually everything at the moment, which they are. And I would suggest it would include Frenkie de Jong. But if you were going for a player like that, he would have been the top choice, somebody that you're targeting earlier in the window and looking at him and saying, okay, well, yeah, if we can get Frenkie, we're going to go for him first, because he's not like a fallback option, where you say, oh, shoot, we could get Frenkie de Jong now. He's been in this situation. He's been in with Barcelona for years. And it's not really a late window type of thing. So what can you say? I mean, look, if Barcelona were suddenly like, sure, he's yours for 20 million, and he was like, yeah, I'll take a huge wage cut, then sure, I think United would sign him at any point in time. Yeah, but a huge
it's gonna be a £400,000 a week wage cut.
Probably even more.
There is something else on that, though. So Frenkie de Jong, during his first, I believe it was season or two with the club, he was only earning something like between 48 and I think £95,000 per week. Reason being that for accounting purposes, Barcelona didn't have the money to actually sign him to that $200,000-$400,000 a week.
Yeah.
And so what they did instead was they agreed, we'll do deferred wages, basically. We're going to give you a really shit pay right now, but then in 2-3 years, we're going to give you good money.
Lump sum.
So it's not lump sum, it's just increased in weekly wages.
Right, okay.
That said, you now get into this issue, and James, you'll know more than I do on kind of the inner workings on this. This is just my understanding of the legal side. So now you get into the issue of his expectancy with Barcelona is significantly higher for his remaining wages on his contract.
Yeah, right.
So again, from the legal standpoint, what you get into there is, well, who covers any discrepancy? Because we're not going to pay $400,000 a week.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where you could have like a, another 10 million payoff, 15 million payoff. That's a lump sum that will be due to the player at the time of the transfer. And that's where it's never been very feasible because it adds just a whole lot of money to the whole deal. And then you're still going to expect a player like that to be on their base wage of 250 or something like that anyway, on top of that. So there's a lot that goes into it. Yeah. So it's always, in that respect, it's a weird situation because 2 years ago when it seemed to advance and seemed to be close, he never wanted to join. I don't see why he would now. I don't see what would have changed at the moment between Barcelona and United and his situation. It's not like, I mean, yes, in some respects from the inside, the United project is a bit better, but it's also a little bit odd. Like it hasn't really ramped up to where we're suddenly more competitive than we might have thought we were 2 years ago. And, so I don't see the change. I don't see a change here that would indicate some sort of big shift in perspective from him.
James, sorry, go ahead, LA. So, my bad.
No, give us your question because then I'm going to move on to the hot topic at the club at the moment, which is the number 6. And that's going to be a difficult conversation for all of us, I think.
Yeah.
James, if you just don't mind my asking real quick, do you have any information on, again, it sounds like contacts between Barca and United have been there, but not super advanced, obviously De Jong's side as well. Do you have any indication of whether the payoff would be basically a credit towards United's transfer fee with the club then covering it, or if it would be, Barca covering it out of any transfer fee, what that would look like? I'm just curious.
I don't think they've discussed it at all, frankly. Yeah, I don't think it's gotten to the point of discussing that at all. When it was a couple of years ago, they wanted United to pay it.
Okay.
And it was Barcelona weren't going to pay it. They wanted United to pay it. And it kind of left it at that. And that's where a lot of things held up on top of him not actually wanting to join in the first place.
That meme, like, look at me, I am the captain now. I think Barca, you are the lever now. You are the final lever.
Well, the chat has answered a poll and said that 53% of them would no longer take Frenkie de Jong to United. Now, that is a significant shift in public opinion.
He's dropped significantly in level in terms of performance. A lot of Barcelona fans would probably want him out of the club as well. It's not like we're signing Frenkie de Jong. Yeah, the injuries are huge as well. Yeah. It's not like we're signing the De Jong that Erik ten Hag had at Ajax. It's no longer that player. It's completely different kettle of fish now. But
so if De Jong isn't the answer, let's talk about some options that might be the answer. So publicly, we've kind of moved on from Ugarte at PSG. Now, I use the word publicly quite intentionally there because I don't know whether privately we've moved on from Ugarte, but there are some other options out there in the market. What do you think where do you think we're looking, James?
Well, publicly is right, yeah, and it is a broad net now. The thing about it is that it's we've not walked from Ugarte in the same way we haven't walked from Braithwaite. You know what I mean? In both instances, if the clubs were to come back and say, "Hey, well, if PSG come in and say, look, 45 million is fine now," then we'd buy him. It would happen. It would get done. And the same thing with Braithwaite. If they came back and said, "Okay, fine, 55 million, you're 5 million more than you offered," it'd probably get done as well. And so they don't want to walk away from them because they're two players that they would still absolutely sign in the proper conditions. But given that, it is a wide net now being cast because two things have happened that they didn't really, I wouldn't say didn't expect, but are just unfortunate. Number one is Casemiro not leaving, right?
Yeah.
There's a top end of what they can spend this summer in the midfield with Casemiro not leaving. That is a lot lower than it would be if he were leaving. If he were leaving, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can spend in there when you consider the wages and the costs and everything associated with it. You can look at a 60-70 million transfer, and there's names that have been discussed and we've looked at a lot earlier. João Neves maybe we would have been more involved in, for example, had Casemiro departed, and there's certainly more than that. And so the net is wide, but it's also not that deep because we're not going to be probably able to spend 60 million on a player. So you take like Zubimendi, for example, and there's been some noise around that. And United, to be fair, have it pretty well, have made some contact over this deal. The issue is there's no way they're going to pay a 60 million release clause. They can't.
Of course.
And it's just not feasible. And they may not value him at that level either. If they did, he probably would have been a priority as well. Concerns over, whether he'd want to leave Spain have always been there with Zubimendi. One of the reasons he didn't go, I think Arsenal were looking at him before. And now, of course, Liverpool are like heavily in this race as of now. And that makes it a really difficult thing, because if they're willing to pay the release clause, then there's really nothing for United in that. Then you have the other names, Fofana, but we know, and I know you guys have talked about this one quite a bit. It's never really moved United into doing something. It's sort of like they're obviously not consoled on this Fofana being the answer, right? Or they could have moved a lot more swiftly for him, especially at the prices that we're talking for a player like him. Then you get all these new names, Sander Berge, Veerman, and I think they're genuine names, to be fair. They are genuine names that are of interest to United at this point in time. And you're looking at them probably in a price bracket of the 20 to 30 range. And that might be the answer. And I think that one of the considerations in play here is when you're rebuilding this midfield for United and Casemiro is still there, is there the unmissable player in the midfield like there was for Lenny Yoro, like they felt there was with Xerxes, an unmissable opportunity in the market in the midfield? And the answer is probably no. Yeah. And what they don't want to do is make big mistakes this summer, right? That's what they've been hugely, hugely focused on, is don't make big mistakes. Don't make the financial decisions of the past that are the reason we have to be careful now. It's an interesting discussion when you look at previous summers. When have we not made a huge mistake? What year have we not made a huge mistake? One could consider last year to be up in the air. We spent a lot of money on Mount and still don't know where we're going to use him at this point in time. The previous year, we obviously had Casemiro and Antony, two big mistakes. We've had the Ronaldo transfer that didn't quite work out as well as everybody hoped it would work out. Every year we make big mistakes that are very expensive and end up setting the club back in terms of what they can do. And under the Glazers, the spending just kept going until the club could spend no more and was over leveraged to the point of near insolvency, essentially. And they don't want to do that. And so there's a potential consideration of who could we get now that's affordable, that helps us. And then maybe next year we can free up then by not going over the top now, we can free something up for next year to go big for a more unmissable target. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again as a name, someone like Adam Wharton, for example, because everybody will want to sign Adam Wharton next year. It's just going to happen that people will want to sign him, and they should, because he's worth it, right? He's that player that everybody should be after in the Premier League. And I think that United should be in that race, because that's, if you're looking at Kobbie Mainoo and saying who's the best possible player, maybe they're not available this summer. Maybe they're just not. And then you want to preserve your financial, wherewithal to move into the future windows. And so I think that's why it's a wide net and it's broad, and nobody really knows who we're going to get at this point in time, because they need a good price and a good opportunity in the midfield in order to get something done when you don't have that unmissable target.
Yeah, I mean, do you? Just before we move on, can we just say a big thank you to Scott, who has just solved a very big technical issue whilst we were while you were talking there, James. Everybody's cameras moved to a completely different location, so thank you very much, Scott. And I'll take the opportunity while we're here to say, if you are here, guys, and you are in the chat, press the like button, press the subscribe button. That one's the important one. Otherwise, we're not going to move on, and nobody gets to hear when we're signing Sander Berge. Just saying, it's entirely your call.
Go ahead.
Real quick, just to return to something James was saying on the Casemiro side, because I know everyone loves a good PSR breakdown, because It's mildly entertaining. So just on the difficulty of moving Casemiro on. So we signed him for 70 million to a 4-year deal at 18.2 million as an annual base salary. So that means his annual amortization for PSR costs. So whenever you're calculating like PSR costs, you take the player's transfer fee, divide that by the amount of years on their contract, and that's their annual amortization. You add that to their wages, and that's their squad costs for reporting purposes. So as of now, his squad cost is 35.7 million pounds. And he has a remaining book value, which is a number of years that he's been at the club. Each amortization you take off of the transfer fee, basically. Yeah. So he's got a remaining book value of 35 million, which means that we would have to sell him for 35 mil just to break even.
Yeah, that's not happening. Yep.
And
no, never in a million years.
Yeah. And that's not even considering his wages then, which we might be on the hook for any discrepancy between him and a new club.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's just not going to happen. Never in a million years. I can't see us getting £35, let alone 35 million.
How much per year? How much per year would Casemiro cost United if he was to see out the remaining years of his contract? Would it be like he's on £300 a year, a week, is he? So how much would he actually cost United in total if he was to see out his contract?
So I literally just closed the tab with that breakdown. Give me 2 seconds, I can tell you. Okay, so his annual amortization is 17.5 million. Annual wages 18.2. So add 18.2 to 35.7. And that's his annual cost. Yeah. So that would be how much he costs us per year. So
there is big opportunities that he possibly does see out that contract. I don't see anyone coming in with a significant bid over the next couple of seasons, to be honest. Especially with the Saudi change at the moment.
It's going to be the same for a lot of the people that we're trying to get rid of at the moment. The contracts that they're on are so large, it makes more financial sense for them to just sit there and see it out. Aaron Wan-Bissaka is another one of those.
Oh, God, sorry.
I was going to ask James, is that the sticking point with like a player like Victor Lindelof as well? But it doesn't really make sense how we have so much difficulty moving him on at this point, especially with the interest from Turkey.
Yeah, it is. It's always the wages, and it's always been the wages for us in selling these kind of players, because there's clubs that can offer fairly decent wages, but decent is very relative. 120 to 140,000 a week at most clubs is like top earner, and Lindelof, there's interest in him, but he's not going to be on a top earner salary in Turkey. It just doesn't make sort of sense. And players like Wan-Bissaka and Scott McTominay, part of the issue is that once a player has a wage and they're running towards the end of their contract, what does Wan-Bissaka do? He's making a fairly good wage right now. They're not going to probably give him a bump on his wages. If he leaves now, he doesn't get a free agent sign-on bonus to kind of wash the probably decrease in wages that he might be getting on a new deal somewhere else, versus being sold where he doesn't get any of that, and there are clauses in these contracts and things that do give them in that +1 where they can get some of the transfer fee as essentially a bonus payment or something like that. And that does occur. That occurred with Fred. United paid a chunk of what they got paid for him out. And so that has to be factored in the consideration of selling some of these players too. If they're in that +1, is there a chunk of that money that's going somewhere else? Does that dictate how much they want to accept on the fee? Is there going to be a payoff involved? There's so many factors that go into that, where sometimes it ends up not making sense to sell the player. You don't gain anything instead. And that really is the complication, of all of it. At the same time, one of the underrated factors in selling players is that, like you take Scott McTominay and Fulham, there's a lot of hesitancy on his part to want to make that move to Fulham. There has been for a long time. And you might think, well, why would that be? Is Fulham a step up from playing for Manchester United? Are Fulham ever going to play in the Champions League? Are Fulham ever going to be competing and winning FA Cups and League Cups and things like that? Probably not, right? So even though he's on the bench and is a more limited role, it's still a significant step down for a player who's, who maybe would want to look at that step down when he's 30, 32 at his next contract. Whereas, interestingly, he'd be a lot more interested in somewhere like Galatasaray because they're in the Champions League. It's actually quite an attractive club to a lot of players, an interesting place to play. Champions League, they pay good wages, great fans, crazy fan base. It's a much more attractive offering. And so it's hard to look at it that way. And a lot of clubs like Fulham, these clubs, they want to see encouragement, right? When they're kind of in that battle over offers, they don't want the player being lukewarm. They want the player saying, yes, come and get me, come and buy me. And that will change and adjust what they pay and what they're willing to offer. And so part of it is that it's a step down from people at United. And if you're nearing the end of your contract, you might as well see it out and then pick where you want to go afterwards, when you're on these big wages. And
they get a big signing on fee because they're coming for free.
Yeah. Exactly. That makes it more attractive just to wait it out. I mean, Pogba did the same thing. Did the same thing. He was on huge wages at United. They didn't. At the end of it, it was like, we're just going to run it down. That was the decision that was made, and that's what he did, so that he could pick where he wanted to go and get, a big payoff. It's plagued United. I mean, uncomfortable conversations because Anthony, the same thing's going to happen. It's going to be 3 more years. Where's he going to go? Whether they want him or not,
they're not interested.
Where's he going to go? I don't know what you're going to do with that. And so it might be, in some sense, it's like you're going to be better off with players like, Eriksen, same thing. He's on near 200,000 a week. He's only got a year left and he's older, so it's not a big deal. But what's going to happen? Why would he take a transfer this year? Why would he? If it was even on the table. So in some sense, part of the suffering that we're having is, not saying this will happen, but in a worst case scenario, Wan-Bissaka, Lindelof, Eriksen, potentially McTominay just walk for free next year. And then United save a lot of wages at that point in time and have a lot more space, and they haven't blown their money this year, in a panic and everything. So it's like, that's like a worst case scenario, but that's why this is, multiple years before it's fully resolved. And that's why some of the discussion has been centered around that. And they don't want to buy just for the sake of it, like getting beyond it, that Dumfries Wan-Bissaka thing. Obviously, they would much prefer to sign Mazraoui. They don't want to swap him for Dumfries. That is not their ideal scenario, is to take on a 27-year-old on a 5-year deal that they're not totally convinced on. And then you've gotten rid of Wan-Bissaka. Have you actually gotten any better? No. Probably not. It's better off to keep him for a year if you're not going to get Mazraoui and let it go, and then sign who you want next summer for, on a different type of deal. So yeah, there's a lot that kind of goes into these challenges. The sins of the past, are catching up with us and have for a long time, but that's what has to be dealt with.
So should we try and do something a little bit more positive now than the doom and gloom of trying to get some people out of our club?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Okay. Why not? De Ligt and Mazraoui. So it looks like those deals might actually get done now. James, where are we with those? Are we in a position where, like we are with Ugarte, where it's going to be, we set our stall out, this is the amount of money we're prepared to pay, and we will quite happily walk away if that's not what you're prepared to accept?
I think on De Ligt, it's closer to that because the Bayern have not really come down from their 50 million euros plus add-ons type of discussion, or it would have happened, So when they said we're surprised, like they surprised when they made that offer for both of them that it was rejected. They just have, it is a weird situation when you have clubs trying to force their players out and demanding that high of a price for them at the same time and not really being flexible on it. Part of the whole interest in De Ligt was the discussion centered around him, the opportunity to sign him being there, and that the price would be at a more reasonable level than they expected, because he's also on big wages, and he's on a lot. He's on over 300,000 a week in terms of euros. So if he comes to United, it's going to be a lot, especially when you've already signed a young center back who's the future of the club to play in his position. So it needs to be an opportunity price. You don't want to pay 50 plus 10 for a player that you're not intending to use in that position or value at that level. So same kind of discussion, unfortunately. Bayern have to be more reasonable. And so I almost am, I'm not saying he's in the bracket as of yet, because I think they'll try again here of Ugarte and Braithwaite, but it could be where we'll walk away unless Bayern become more reasonable about this deal. Masraoui thinks a lot simpler. The cost, they already agreed a fee with West Ham. That was like 15 million. So as soon as Wan-Bissaka and West Ham can kind of sort it out, and I think they will, but it is odd for the same reasons we just discussed why there might be some hesitancy for Wan-Bissaka and for United on that deal, why there might just be just a little bit of hesitancy there, where United are probably trying to give him a little bit more of a push out the door than he wants, because he could sign for free in Turkey next year if he wanted to and get a lot of money. He really could. They want him, and that is an opportunity for him. And there's other clubs in London that he could go to potentially as well in the future. Again, the money and all of that. And if he wasn't making what he was making at United, then it would be a different story. But he is. So yeah, it's sticky. It's sticky, but United are not going to they're not going to just go spend for the sake of it like we have in the past and make, short-term decisions that have long-term consequences without being sure of what they're doing. And that does make it a little bit complex.
Yeah.
Outside of De Ligt for centre-backs, have you heard of any other targets? Like, I've heard of some names mentioned, Mohamed Simakan, Luke Cave, players like that, but it doesn't seem like there's any concrete names in the media if we fail to sign De Ligt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe we won't sign anybody. Yeah. I mean, that's my kind of conclusion to it as well, is that maybe we won't. I liked when there was, when Hanchko was going around, it started to look a little more, this makes sense, a decent fee, left-sided, left-footed, left back, can play at left back, even could do coverage on different sides, a little bit more like what Braithwaite would have brought to the table in that sense. That's quieted down quite a lot. Now, could they just suddenly overnight go, yeah, we're in this position, right? And with United, where if they want to do it, they can do it. And we're at that stage in the transfer window where they got to make those big decisions and then just go for it. But obviously, given that we're a few days away from the Community Shield and just over a week from the actual season starting, they must be considering that they may not sign somebody, for these positions. They must be, because once you get to that point, you have to be thinking we may not sign anyone, because once the season starts, it does get more difficult. And you already don't have them for the start of the season by now. If you're not signing them, like this week, if you're not signing them, you're not having them for the start of the season. And the only reason you would do that is if it's a realistic scenario that you don't sign someone. If Victor Lindelof can't leave, we have Johnny Evans, who's been added on. Maguire is there. He'll probably start on Saturday with Lissandro, I would expect, and he'll probably start next week too. Once we signed Lenny Yoro, it looked less likely we were going to sign another center back for quite a while, and then he got injured. It's not that significant at his age and this kind of injury to where they're going to make huge changing, sweeping decisions off of that. So again, going back to the De Ligt thing, this is the whole operation is pay the value we expect, we value a player at, or we don't buy them. And that is the difference between now and in the past. And that would have prevented the signing of Anthony, and that would have prevented probably the signing of quite a number of mistakes that we've made in the past. If they're not there at the value we want, then we won't sign them. And Ugarte, that's where that is. And so it's if you're making those decisions in the short term, then you're also deciding we may not sign anybody. And given how late, Barada, Ashworth, and such were all getting into the game on this, this probably is a consideration. Don't make a mistake, and then we go again next summer. You know, and I know that's not what anybody wants to hear, but it's like
true. It is what it is.
It's a thought process.
If you were to give a percentage, let's say, for the fans watching, if you were to give a percentage chance now of, say, number one, your confidence of us signing anyone before the Community Shield, and then a percentage of your confidence of us signing someone before the first day of the season.
I would say 20%, 25% before the Community Shield. Wan-Bissaka and Mazraoui could happen really fast, right? That could be the thing that occurs really quickly. Should they, as soon as they agree, Mazraoui will come in. You know what I mean? Like, that one is more simple in that sense. Wan-Bissaka and West Ham, if that is agreed, then this can happen pretty fast.
Yeah,
I still think it's more likely to. So I would say 25% that it happens this week because it's Wednesday and it's still kind of dragging on. 60% that we get something in next week, and that would be the deal. I think is the most likely at this stage. Yeah.
Okay, well,
that would be the answer.
We are gonna do a fan Q&A from the chat, but only when we hit 610 subscribers. So if you guys hit 610 subscribers, we'll start the Q&A. But until then, Dylan, there was another player that you wanted to ask about, wasn't there?
There was actually. Ben Jacobs reported it yesterday. I've heard about interest in the past from United. Liverpool more specifically when I asked. What do you know right now about Ederson from Atlanta?
Yeah, that is an interesting one because, again, there are some tentative links from United to him where they've definitely looked at it. Liverpool, yeah, as you mentioned, were much more hotly kind of following, or at least reported on that. And they've been a bit of a weird club this summer with all the changes going on where they've kind of flip-flopped between they'd been going for a lot of Klopp players and focusing on a lot of Klopp players, which are very different to a lot of the players that the new people would like to pursue. But there's still a lot of the old people there, and I think that's why they're really slow in the market this summer. But it's kind of, he's available at a good price. So he probably falls under the same net as these other players we're talking about. He clearly wasn't the priority, right? Because if he was, you could have got him for 30, 35 million, if I'm not mistaken, in that range. So I've never heard much like intense of like, yes, we really want that player, right? Or it would have happened. I've never heard that. And so he kind of falls under this, who the hell are we signing now in the midfield type of thing, where it's like, sure, they might see him now as an opportunity, but probably not at, they probably, if they were to go for a player like that, they'll probably throw in a lower bid or something like that, and say, well, if we could get him for 25, then sure, and that's how quite a few players will probably be. It's a weird situation. It really is. I had direct discussions with some people at the club, and I know it's kind of like coping with the situation, but there was sort of very much an acceptance that Casemiro wasn't going to leave, and let's see what we can get out of him and get how much, get the most out of him. It's very limiting. It just is. It's very limiting. If Scott doesn't go, they're really limited here on what they can do, and that is a problem. So yeah, it's the same story. It's like it's a tangle. They need to get a really good price for him, and then they would still have to decide, do we want to sign a player we weren't totally convinced of in the first place? And it feels like they won't, I guess, is where I'm at. It feels like they just won't make those kind of moves like Fofana, Ederson are kind of in the same bracket. If they weren't totally convinced, they're just not going to do it just because they need someone, That's how it feels anyway.
In the bracket, obviously, is it?
Yeah,
that's why Amrabat's definitely still in the bracket, because of loan.
Yeah.
On that, kind of a question for Ollie then, if you do know, considering what we've spent so far, which I think 51 million for Europe plus add-ons, I think it was 34 for Xerxes. Do you know how much we right now can actually spend without selling any players right now at this moment of time? If we were not to sell anyone, how much could we spend, if any?
So I'm not going to give you an exact dollar figure, because any attorney who says he can give you an exact anything is a fucking liar.
Yeah. Okay.
What I will say is, so Manchester United there are two sides to this, that being PSR and cash flow. From a PSR standpoint, it's my opinion that we're in a fairly good position, in as much as our record losses were taken off of the reporting period this last time around. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, we've got secured financing, which is actually above and beyond the total limit. The total limit would typically be 90 million in secured financing. Obviously, he contributed even more to that, but we only get the PSR benefit of the 90 million, which brings our total allowable losses over a 3-year reporting period to 115 million, or sorry, 105 million, pardon me. And so from that standpoint, I think it would be, I don't want to say naive, but I think it would be inaccurate to say that PSR is our limiting factor this year. Rather, what I would go with is a cash flow issue. That being because pursuant to the purchase agreement, the secured funding, we get the PSR benefit on one hand. On the other hand, that funding contractually is supposed to go to either ordinary operating expenses, which I'll just cut to the chase on that one. It's bullshit language which says do what we actually intend this for, but here's a fallback. Or the stadium.
Okay.
And so with regard to that, you kind of have to remove that money. It works from PSR standpoint. It's really, really beneficial from PSR standpoint. But from a cash flow standpoint, it does us no good. And that's kind of where we are. And James, you might know some more about this from the insiders at the club. The cash flow standpoint, I think we're okay, but we're not doing Donald Duck diving into a fucking pot of gold, you know?
Yeah. A lot of the stuff on the cash side of things will likely be, put into, a credit line that they have that they've been able to pay some down and extend terms on and things like that.
Yeah,
it is a little complicated because there's a lot of factors that are unknown into all of this. Part of the thing is that when it comes to PSR, there's two considerations with it, which is number one, that you could spend more than we have. There's no doubt about that. But you don't want to spend all your space.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend all your space, and a couple of reasons for that are, one, you have no guarantees of future performance. If United miss out on Champions League this year, they're going to,
you'll hit a revenue loss of 45 million.
Yeah. And you also are losing, if I'm not mistaken, a profit year as you roll over into the next one. You actually lose a profitable year. So it's kind of a balance of if they spend another 120 million this year, there's a chance you can't spend it all next summer. And that's not a situation they want to be in. And so it's limiting in a sense of future planning. You want to be logical with it. You want to be able to look at it and say, okay, we don't know everything yet. We just got here. We don't know what we might need next year. We don't know where we're going to end up this year. We don't know if we're going to be in Champions League. We don't yet have a good predictor of our future performance and a good trajectory. We need to be careful this year, really careful this year, so that next year we can actually, no matter what happens, we can kind of really complete our rebuild project. And that's kind of where they're at on it, which is fair enough. It's kind of the reality of what you have to deal with in this. So, it's kind of a complexity of the direct ramifications of PSR versus their thinking with PSR being a limiting factor in a long-term sense. So it's kind of two different ways of looking at it from a literal and from their own view of the situation.
How vulgar am I allowed to be on this?
I mean, the C word probably is a bit far, but otherwise, say what you want.
Okay, sweet. So to translate what James just said, don't be a virgin on prom night and blow your load too early.
Basically, yeah, that's kind of, yeah. Okay. Right, we're going to do some fan Q&A now because we did hit the subscriber goal, but I do still want you to press subscribe because why wouldn't you? We're here all week. Do the subscribe thing. It's Ollie, tell them to subscribe in the most vulgar way you can think of.
Dude, you really don't want me to do that.
Without getting us banned.
Without us losing monetization. Okay. Let's do some fan Q&A. The one thing that's really cropping up a lot in the chat at the moment, James, I said on Twitter today that we had made an offer to Zubamendi's camp, not to the club, but an offer to Zubamendi. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. You heard the same?
Similar, that there's been some contacts. I wouldn't say, directly in the that I've had directly what's occurred there, but that United had some definitely contact. I mean, once you get into their offers versus no offers, you're going to get different answers from people who want to say different things. And from United's standpoint, I don't believe that they will indicate that they've made an offer at this point in time. But there are just when you're having discussions with them, it's one and the same. I mean, until you're getting down to making the official offers with the clubs, there's very little difference in the language of what is actually going on in those conversations, especially how one wants to present it. So of interest, and had those contacts, but again, probably well above what they can afford at this point. It's just one of the options.
Okay. Hamza and UFC says, James, are United actually thinking about giving McTominay an extra 1-year contract?
You mean a +1?
Yeah.
I mean, adding a +1. They might. I mean, it's hard to say if they will or they won't. It's we don't really know with this new hierarchy yet how they treat these +1s. We actually have no idea. The old hierarchy always triggered them. We don't really know yet. There were some triggered in January, but they were kind of before they were in the door and able to make these decisions. Those were part of the pre-plan that would have been submitted between them. We don't know. We honestly don't know, and that I think is an impossible question to answer, frankly, just because we actually don't know what they're thinking at this point in time.
Also, sorry, real quick. Speaking as a fan, no other basis of opinion. If McTominay leaves my club before Anthony does, I'm right my car off of a fucking bridge.
Okay. Right, I'm going to come on to you, Ollie, now, right? Because in your Takeover podcast, which you did with us going back, what was that, March now? You said exclusively that 2025 was the year that the Glazers exited the club, and you said we could clip that if it didn't happen. Now, hold up.
I did not say that was when they would exit the club. I said, well, that's when the dime drops. That's the exact language I used.
That is the exact language.
Dime drops it was.
And you are a lawyer, so language is important. We have a question in the chat about that. It's from where is it? Hey guys, question coming from Soprano territory. Do you think Ratcliffe and Co are not taking any risks this summer simply because they don't want to inhibit summer 2025 plans when they're fully in the door?
So there are a couple things here. Number one, again, for the sake of clarity, I said that's when the dime would drop. I did not say that's when a full takeover happens. My expectation, and not my expectation, my prediction, I should say, is that what you're going to see is a couple of convertible rounds, that being Trawlers, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Ineos, whichever of those parties it may be, purchasing or loaning the club money, which will then be converted into equity.
Right.
That's how I think this goes down. I frankly don't think there's much of another viable option or something that would make more sense for both parties. Okay. Secondarily, what you're looking at here is you fundamentally have entity separation. Okay. So Trawlers is not the same thing as Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Trawlers is not the same thing as Manchester United. They're the primary shareholder. However, not the primary, but Trawlers is the largest individual shareholder at this point. Okay. However, from absent, a capital injection or anything like that, they're dealing with house money here. They're dealing with Manchester United's finances, not their own, if that makes sense. And so I don't think that any lack of action from a transfer standpoint, I think what James said earlier is actually very Like, obviously he knows way more about what's going on in the club. I'm a third-party viewer, you know? But I think what he said is more accurate, that being there might be plans for future transfers. They might want to remain flexible in terms of your PSR, cash flow, things like that. However, in terms of, you know, takeover talk, purchasing equity, doing convertible rounds, any of that, that has nothing to do with our transfers.
So what you're saying is Glazer's out in 2025. Yeah, I hear you. It's on the internet forever.
Blazers start to be out 2025. Again, time drops. I did the language correctly to not bind myself there.
Okay.
Blazers out 2026.
Yeah.
Blazers out in an ongoing process, beginning in 2025 and hopefully ending 2 days after when one of them is hit by a bus.
You're such a lawyer. Okay. James, who would complement Kobbie Mainoo better? Berge or Zubimendi?
I would probably honestly say Berge, simply because I'm not saying he's a better player, but I think he is more complementary because he would he's a bit of better defensive shielding, and that's just my opinion of looking at Kobbie Mainoo. Is I think he's a bit better there. He's a bit better in carrying the ball as well as from a defensive standpoint than Zubimendi, who's not that challenging, I guess would be the word. He's not that combative. And my opinion is to free up Kobbie Mainoo from as many defensive duties as possible and let him do the other things. Yeah. And so I think Sander Berge would be maybe a better match. I'm not saying he's a better player than Zubimendi. I think Zubimendi is definitely a better player. I've always personally thought that a defend first combative midfielder would be ideal.
Question for Dylan. Dylan, how do you feel about winning the attacking football facial hair civil war against LA? There was a poll in the chat of who had the better facial hair. You won 53% to 47%. I demand a recount on that.
Honestly, I'm surprised. I'm actually surprised it's that close. It should be 100%. That beard, look, I'm not going to comment on the beard, but I'm absolutely honoured to win the contest. And I also want to say I completely agree with James. I had to fight that in the group chat yesterday. Sander Berge for United. United need a ground covering midfielder. Zubimendi isn't a ground covering midfielder. Sander Berge is, and that's 100% the type of player that United need. Doesn't matter that he plays for Bournemouth. Doesn't matter where we're signing him for. He's the type of profile they need.
I think, from my perspective, I don't know why we're not looking at someone like Fabian Ruiz. I know he's a PSG player, and there's already that conversation going on with PSG about Ugarte, but Fabian Ruiz in the Euros was an absolute sensation. In the final, when Rodri went off, I thought he was spectacular.
They were better.
I'd love to see
Rodri.
Yeah. I'd love to see us doing a deal there
in the tournament.
Okay, so the last one, we've got a couple more minutes. There is a question, and I can't find it anymore, about how you feel the season is going to go. So we're just going to go around quickly before we close up and do some quick predictions. So we're going to do finishing position, we're going to do top goal scorer, and we're going to do signing of the season. So James, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so finishing position, I'm going to say that United will finish 4th. And then top scorer will be Marcus Rashford. And the signing of the season is going to be Xerxes.
Okay. Ollie?
All right, so finishing position. Anytime someone asks me that, I say we're winning it all. Fuck it.
Realistic as ever.
Yeah, in terms of what I actually think will happen, you can go ahead and bleep that out now because I really don't want to say it.
It's live.
Someone
you can't bleep anything.
Honestly, okay. I think finishing 6th.
That's fair.
Okay,
it's fair.
And that said, I think we're finishing 6th. Ten Hag gets sacked by Christmas, and we have an interim that comes in and gets us into better.
We've got an interim already.
That'll be right.
Rude coming to save us. And then
top goal scorer.
Take your pick between Rashford and Bruno. I'm going Bruno there. Provided that we start playing him in a more advanced role instead of, him picking the ball up off the center backs. And signing up the season, I'm going to go Euro. I think Euro.
Okay.
But, kind of a coin flip there. That's just where I land. It could equally well be Xerxes.
Dylan?
Mine's conditional. And it makes sense that it's conditional. If we don't have an injury crisis like last season, I'm going to say Torres. If we do, I think we could finish 7th or 8th if we have an injury crisis like we did last season, especially in defence, because we are thin in defence. Top goal scorer, Marcus Rashford.
Okay.
Signing of the season, Sanderberg.
Ooh, I like it.
Okay.
I will say, if we do sign him, I think he would have quite an impact, just because it's so bad in that position. It's so bad right now that there are a lot of players that could have a massive impact on our midfield at this point in time.
Also, I'll be honest.
Could...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying one of us could have an impact on the midfield. It's that time.
Yeah. Honestly,
I got to be honest. I am a whore for a 6-8-10 midfield, which I think Burge, Manu, Bruno gives you.
I agree. So for my predictions, I'm gonna. If we sign any of the quoted number 6s, I think we finish runners up.
Oh,
I think we finish runners up. Top goal scorer with Ruder's manager, top goal scorer. I'm gonna go Rashford, and signing of the season, I think. Well, Dylan just said either one of us could do a job in midfield. I'm gonna go James Rhodes is my signing of the season, playing CDM. Okay,
I'll take it.
Listen, that's all we've got time for. My thank you to Ollie, to James, to Dylan for joining us. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's completely free. You can do it, and it doesn't cost you anything. Just do it. On Friday, we have our weekly episode of the Attacking Football podcast with Alex Talks Football, talking all things women in football, in social media, and women's voices in general. And then next week, we have our predictions podcast with none other than Jack Talbot. So don't forget to join us for that. Thank you very much, boys, for joining us. You'll be back on again, I'm sure. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Love that.
Well,
cheers, guys.
Well, James, all the best.
Yes, of course.